Alright, greetings friends. I'm talking about languages again, as I talk about every time. And now, I want to make a video about Steve Kaufman, okay, Christophe Clugston, and basically the YouTube community of language learners and linguists in academia, okay? Now, those of you who don't know Steve Kaufman, alright, Steve Kaufman is one of the guys on YouTube that produces a lot amount of videos about learning languages. I mean, he speaks, 10 something languages to varying degrees and is very involved in language learning. He has his own website and things like that, okay? Now, Christophe Clugston is a guy who is currently in Southeast Asia, okay? And he basically he's done some grad work in linguistics work at the graduate level, okay? He's co-authored like at least a paper that I know of, and is, involved with the linguistics community from an academic community perspective, okay? So basically you got Steve Kaufman here, who is like the representative of the YouTube language learning community, and then you have Christophe Clugston here, who's kind of the representative of linguistics and academia, okay? Now, Steve Kaufman calls himself a linguist, okay, in the sense of the term that he speaks many languages, okay. Now the term linguist has that meaning. It also has the meaning of someone who has studied linguistics and basically like someone who researches languages. So you have linguist meaning someone who speaks many languages, or someone who studies languages in academia, okay, like a professor of linguistics, okay. Additionally, Steve Kaufman has claimed sometime in the past, Steve Kaufman said like he can learn any language, okay? Now, these two things Christophe Clugston has really focused in on and tries to basically deflate these ideas that Steve Kaufman said he can do, okay? He says you can only use the term linguist if you're an academic professor of linguistics, right? He additionally says that Steve Kaufman can't learn any language that doesn't have a script, because Christophe Clugston's background is a field linguist, basically where you go into like an undocumented language and figure out how the language works, right? What are the sounds, what's the grammar, what are the social constraints, things like that. Now, this is what I want to say about all this stuff, okay? That's the background information. Basically, I think Steve Kaufman is a great resource, okay, for anyone who wants to learn a language, okay? He has experience learning languages, and basically he makes videos about that, about learning a language, how he goes about it, what he thinks. Now, I've had some, email communication with Steve Kaufman, and basically he's a little bit of a stubborn guy, alright? He's kind of a stubborn guy, okay? Like me, my background, I am just finishing up my master's right now in TESOL, or Applied Linguistics, right? How to teach English. So I've done a lot of look into second language acquisition, right? Things like that. Like I've done my own research, okay? I'll have a master's degree basically in August. And so I don't consider myself a linguist, right? I'm basically an English teacher who's very informed about the research that happens in that field. And so I know how academia works, right? Like I've done my own research, I've done a lot of reading, I've interacted with professors, taught my own classes. I know how academia works. And basically I know how YouTube language learning works because like I love learning languages, right? I've studied Spanish, German, Croatian, Russian, all these languages, and I know what happens on YouTube, right? I follow Steve Kaufman, Moses McCormick, Luca, Richard, Amir, all these guys, right? And so I kind of have my feet in both worlds, and so I can kind of have a unique perspective on the whole thing represented by Steve Kaufman and Christophe Clugston. So basically, I appreciate Steve Kaufman, alright? And I think he's great, and like I said, he's a little bit stubborn. Like, we had a conversation about the social aspect of language learning. Like I said, I've done a lot of second language acquisition. I'm informed about that stuff, and so I know a lot of work by Krashen, Chomsky, Bonnie Norton, Firth and Wagner, right? And the whole thing I got into Steve Kaufman was like, he says you don't need the social aspect, because how he learns languages is basically he reads books and listens to stuff on his own, right, and learns the language that way. But there's this whole other group of like immigrant refugees who come to a new culture, and basically based on the social networks and the experiences they have in that new culture, they either will or will not learn the new language to a varying degree based on, like, do they have a network of people who speak the language? Are they motivated to do that, or are they marginalized and then they don't learn the language? So it's very applicable to some groups of people, not to Steve Kaufman. Hey, fine, whatever. So, you know, he's a little bit stubborn, but fine, he's a great guy. Now, Christophe Clugston, from what I understand, he basically specializes in field linguistics, right? Like analyzing and figuring out about non-documented languages that don't have scripts, right? And yeah, like most of his videos just try to come in and kind of belittle and deflate Steve Kaufman. Tone is pretty aggressive, pretty belligerent, and just like not friendly, you know what I mean? And so Christophe Clugston's whole kind of premise is like, hey, look at all these people on YouTube. They're not in academia. They don't have peer-reviewed journals and such. Basically, they should not even be paid attention to, right? But I don't really agree with that. And I also don't agree with his kind of aggressiveness because, one, the goal of the YouTube community is to learn languages, right? I mean, people are interested in how they can best learn language. And he kind of like emphasizes like you need to learn syntax, morphology, social linguistics. But I want to say that if I want to learn French or Russian, or I want to learn a language that has a script with the goal is to be able to communicate in that language with millions and millions of people, and I have the choice between like a teach yourself French book or a book on X-bar theory and morphological parsing. Like if I take these X-bar and morphological parsing theories books and I read these with the goal of learning French, I'm just going to be wasting my time, you know what I mean? And like, I think people realize that, and that's kind of why Christophe Clugston has a bad rep, is because he has kind of this like condescending attitude, and he tries to like impose the academic rigor onto a YouTube language learning community, where the whole point of the YouTube language learning community is to avoid that academic rigor in order to best find out what works for an individual person to learn a language. And that's why people like Steve Kaufman and Moses McCormick and Richard and Luca, who have learned many languages, can provide a lot of insight to that. And you know, it's like you're trying to impose these restrictions on a world that operates without them. And so that's kind of why Christophe Clugston has a bad rep. And you know, like if people could dislike his videos, they probably would. However, I do have a recommendation for him. Christophe Clugston, dude, like if you want to, you know, like provide beneficial, insightful videos on how maybe the academic world could provide insight to the language learning community on YouTube, like by all means make a video that can benefit people. Like, you know, you don't have to become like a notable person in YouTube by trying to deflate Steve Kaufman. Like if you come in with your own ideas and your own suggestions, like people will be like, hey, this is good stuff, and they'll, you know, like they would like your videos. So basically I'll just review here. I talked about Steve Kaufman in YouTube language learners, talked about Christophe Clugston in academia and how he kind of tries to impose that on YouTube and how it doesn't really work. And yeah, I guess my message for Steve Kaufman is, Steve Kaufman, keep on making great videos, you know, keep on learning languages. My message for Christophe Clugston is, like, come on man, like, seriously, no one wants to hear you complain about Steve Kaufman. If you want to come in with your own ideas and show how an academic linguist could help a language learning linguist, by all means, do so. That's all I got for right now.